Sometimes it's the quietest people who remind us what it means to feel human again. The room was silent, save for the low hum of the city beyond the glass. Miles above the streets, in a suite untouched by the chaos below, Oliver Dalen returned home. The door clicked shut behind him. His steps were slow, heavy, like the weight of 100 decisions still clung to his shoulders. A flight from Tokyo, a conference in Zurich. Numbers, faces, expectations. But none of it prepared him for what he saw. There, curled up on one end of his sofa, was a woman. She was small, tucked into herself, her head resting on her arm like she hadn't meant to fall asleep, just closed her eyes for a second too long. Her shoes were still on. Her apron was wrinkled. The smell of cleaning supplies still lingered faintly in the air. Oliver didn't speak, didn't move. He simply watched, not with anger, not even confusion, but with the kind of quiet curiosity that only appears when something breaks through the surface of routine. She wasn't supposed to be here not like this. He knew that. She was staff, a name he'd probably seen on paper, never spoken, never noticed. Yet here she was, asleep in the middle of his world. And for the first time in years, he felt like that world had paused. Her breathing was soft, slow, the kind of sleep born from utter exhaustion, not comfort. There was a cup of coffee on the table, untouched, still faintly warm. She had been trying to keep going. Oliver took a slow breath, pressing his fingers to his temple. The instinct to wake her flickered, but then something else stirred. Compassion, maybe, or guilt. What must it take, he wondered, for a person to work until their body simply stopped? He moved toward the bar, poured a glass of water, then sat, across from her, just sat. The glow of the skyline lit her face in fragments. Her name, he searched for it, tapped into the hotel staff records on his tablet. Mira Elson, 26, 2 years with the hotel, not a single complaint. He frowned gently. 2 years, and he'd never even seen her. Yet here she was, breaking through the edges of his carefully controlled life, not with ambition or boldness, but with tired hands and a soul too worn to stand. And he realized, maybe for the first time, you don't have to shout to be seen. Sometimes you just have to stay still long enough for someone to notice. The room still held the scent of fresh linen and lemon polish, perfectly folded towels, gleaming floors, a warm cup of coffee gone cold, all signs of a day spent caring for a space that was never hers. But tonight, something was different. Julian's eyes were drawn back to her mirror. She shifted faintly in her sleep, her brow creasing for just a second. Even in rest, it looked like her mind couldn't find peace. His jaw tightened. What kind of life wears a person down like this? Before he could answer the question in his own thoughts, a soft sound broke the silence, the subtle chime of a digital clock from the suite's kitchenette. Mira stirred. Her lashes fluttered once, twice, and then she woke with a jolt. God! She gasped, eyes wide with alarm, as if the weight of where she was and who she was with landed on her all at once. She scrambled to sit up, hands trembling, scanning the room like a trapped bird looking for an exit. Her eyes locked onto his. She froze. I'm so sorry, sir, she stammered, pressing a hand to her forehead, as though trying to recall how reality had slipped away. Julian's voice was steady, not cold, not angry. You fell asleep. Her breath hitched. Yes, I didn't mean to. I was just... Her voice faded as she backed away, instinct pulling her toward the door. I'll leave. You must be exhausted. She stopped mid-step. Her eyes searched his, unsure whether she was being reprimanded or understood. She didn't answer. Julian asked, softer now, how many shifts today? Her fingers tightened around the edge of her uniform. 3. A whisper, barely audible. He let out a breath. Not frustration. Something else. Something that felt dangerously close to empathy. Sit. She blinked, startled. Sir? I said sit. He softened the words, like offering a chair to someone soaked in rain. She hesitated, torn between pride and fatigue. Fatigue won. Mira sank back onto the couch, shoulders drawn in, as though she didn't know how to occupy space without apology. Julian poured himself another drink, but handed her a bottle of water instead. She took it with both hands, cautious. You work hard, he said, meeting her eyes. It wasn't a compliment. It was a statement, a fact. She nodded, swallowing. I have to. Why? She let out a slow breath. Then came the truth, raw and without drama. If I don't, I won't make rent. No bitterness, no pity, just reality. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. How much do they pay you? She stiffened. Enough. I doubt that. She didn't argue, just unscrewed the bottle cap and took a quiet sip. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like both of them had stepped into some invisible middle ground, no longer boss and employee. Just two people, two strangers on opposite sides of a life. I should go, she whispered. Julian didn't stop her. He simply watched as she stood, fixed her uniform, and began to walk toward the door. But just before she reached it, his voice reached her again. Mira. She turned, surprised. Come back tomorrow. Her brows drew together. Sir? Not to clean, he said. I'd like to talk to you. She stood still, as if unsure whether she was being offered something or tested. About what? He tilted his head, considering her. About an opportunity. For a second she said nothing, just stared at him, this man she thought she'd never speak to, much less sit with. Then she gave a small nod, just once, and stepped out the door. Julian leaned back, watching the space she'd left behind. He hadn't expected this. But the way she showed up, broken but still standing, that stirred something in him he didn't know was still alive. This was the beginning of something. That night, Mira barely remembered how she got home. The city murmured outside her window, a lullaby of noise and neon. She lay on her mattress, frayed, too thin for comfort eyes, on the cracked ceiling. Come back tomorrow. The words wouldn't leave her. Not as a housekeeper. What else then? Come back tomorrow. Those 3 words hadn't left Mira's mind all night. Not to clean. But for what, then? She turned to face the wall in her dark little apartment, blanket tangled at her feet. Her mattress was thin, the room barely more than a box, but it was hers. Still, last night, something had shifted. Something in the air. In her. A man like Julian Dalen didn't notice people like her. Not really. So why now? Was it pity? A game? Or something she hadn't yet understood? At 6 a.m. on time, her alarm blared, tearing her from a sleep that had never truly come. She sat up slowly, heart pounding beneath her worn t-shirt. She had 2 choices. Ignore it. Keep scrubbing floors and surviving. Or go. Walk back into the unknown and see what he meant. She didn't have the privilege of turning down possibilities, even strange, impossible ones. By 9 a.m., Mira stood inside the elevator of the Astoria Grand, her reflection flickering in the mirrored walls. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the penthouse button. She wasn't here to clean rooms today. The lift glided upward, silent and smooth. Her palms were damp. When the doors opened, the corridor stretched before her, elegant and intimidating. She walked slowly, each step echoing louder than the last. At the suite door, she paused, took a breath, knocked. Come in. She pushed the door open. Julian stood by the window, back to her, phone pressed to his ear. The sunlight framed his silhouette, sleek suit, broad shoulders, calm control. Yes, noon. No later. His voice was clipped, precise. He ended the call, then turned. His gaze met hers instantly, steady, unreadable. You came. Mira gave a small nod, unsure if it was bravery or fear moving her forward. He gestured to the seat near the bar. Sit. She obeyed, folding her hands tightly in her lap. Julian leaned against the edge of his desk, watching her, not like a man used to commanding rooms, but like someone trying to read a language he'd never spoken. You're probably wondering why you're here. She nodded again. He inhaled deeply. I don't believe in accidents, he said. Last night, when I saw you asleep here, it made something very clear to me. Her heart thudded. I've built a life people envy, he continued. Wealth, power. But not once did I stop to notice the people who make it all function. People like you. Mira blinked. She didn't know what to say. She'd never been seen this way, never been seen at all. I read your file, Julian added. 2 years, not one missed shift, not one complaint. I can't afford to, she said softly, not out of shame, just truth. He nodded, like he already knew. Then came the question that caught her off guard. What do you really want from life? She froze. Sir, Julian, he corrected. She hesitated. The name felt foreign in her mouth, too intimate. Julian, she whispered, I just want to survive. His expression shifted, something tightened in his jaw. That's not a life, he said. She lowered her gaze. A pause. Then, I want to offer you something. She looked up sharply. What kind of offer? His mouth curved, just slightly. I need a personal assistant. She stared. You... What? You're capable, he said. You work hard. You're present. That matters more than experience, but I don't even know where to begin. I'll teach you. It didn't feel real, she almost laughed. I'm just a housekeeper. He met her eyes. Not anymore. Her breath caught. What's the catch? She asked, voice tightening with suspicion. Julian smiled, but not unkindly. Just one rule. She waited. Don't lie to me. The words settled like a pact between them. Simple, but heavy. Mira's thoughts raced. It sounded like a dream, but dreams don't come true for people like her. And yet, he hadn't lied, not once. It scared her more than anything. Later that morning, Mira followed another woman down the hallway. Tall, impeccably dressed, cold as glass. This way, the woman said without looking back. His schedule is insane. If you mess up, you're out. Her name was Miranda, his current assistant. Mira nodded, trying to keep up. Meetings, emails, names, rules. By noon, Mira's head was spinning. But in the chaos, one thing became clear. She hadn't stepped into luxury. She'd stepped into fire. Listen. Miranda's voice was sharp, practical. As she handed Mira a thick planner, the weight of it a silent warning. His schedule is insane. He's demanding. If you mess up, you're out. Got it? Mira nodded, her fingers trembling slightly as they gripped the edges of the planner. She had no idea what she was getting into, but the weight of it settled around her as soon as she stepped into Carter Enterprises. By noon, her mind was a blur. The whirlwind of meetings, calls, and emails felt like a constant storm. Alexander's world wasn't just fast, it was relentless. Every moment carried stakes that Mira had never known. The pressure started to gnaw at her. How could she keep up with all this? She wasn't sure she could do it. But then, she glanced at her phone. Her rent notice stared back at her, past due. Her stomach tightened. She had no choice. That evening, Julian called her into his office. Well? He asked, his eyes dark and unreadable. Mira swallowed. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and spoke with a quiet resolve. I'll do it. The corners of his mouth twitched. almost imperceptibly, but he didn't smile. Good. The words rang in her ears, but something deep inside told her that life, as she knew it, would never be the same again. The next morning, the clock read 5 a.m. Mira had barely enough time to drink a half cup of coffee before the black luxury car arrived at the entrance of her tiny apartment. The driver, Grant, said nothing, his face as cold and expressionless as the glass skyscrapers they passed. They drove through the same city Mira had always cleaned in the shadows of its wealth, but now she was stepping into its heart. Carter Enterprises loomed ahead, a steel and glass monument to everything she had never thought possible. As she stepped out of the car, nerves coiled tight in her stomach, she could feel the gravity of it all. She was here, really here, and she couldn't shake the sense that she was still a shadow among giants. The security guard eyed her skeptically. Name? Sophie Turner, she said, trying to steady her voice. He checked the list, then nodded. New PA. Go ahead. With a deep breath, Mira stepped inside. The lobby took her breath away. Polished wood gleamed. The air smelled of money quiet, untouchable power. Employees moved like soldiers on a mission, their clothes sharp, their gazes steely. She felt out of place, like she didn't belong. Before she could overthink it, a voice broke through the haze of her doubts. You're late. She turned quickly. There, standing by the elevator, arms crossed, was Julian. Mira checked her watch. It was 6:59 a.m. I said be here at 6:50, he said coolly, stepping into the elevator. She hurried inside, her cheeks flushing, heart racing. The world I live in, Julian began, runs on precision. He glanced at her, eyes dark. 1 minute late can cost millions. She swallowed hard. The weight of his words was heavier than she'd anticipated. The elevator doors slid shut. When they arrived on the top floor, Mira felt small. The view of the city from Julian's private office was breathtaking, all glass, steel, and endless possibilities. But the power in the room, the way everyone moved with purpose, overwhelmed her. Miranda, standing by the desk, arms folded, gave Mira a brief glance before muttering, under her breath, "She won't last a week." Mira's spine stiffened. But before she could react, Julian spoke. "Ignore her," he said with a sigh, as though the weight of this conversation was already taking its toll on him. Then came her first assignment, meetings, schedules, calls, emails. Her mind spun as she tried to absorb everything. Julian didn't slow down, not for a second. His every move was deliberate, and Mira was expected to match his pace. By noon, her confidence was crumbling. She handed him a file, the wrong one. His gaze flicked over it, and then his voice cut through the tension like a knife. "This is the wrong report." Her stomach dropped. "Fix it," he said, the sharpness in his tone making her heart race. Mira rushed to the desk, her hands trembling as she pulled up the correct file. She was shaking, trying to remember everything she'd learned in the last few hours, but all she could focus on was the rising pressure in her chest. She was drowning in a sea of expectations. Then, Julian's voice came again, softer this time, though no less commanding. "Breathe, Mira," he said. "You'll get better." His words, simple and calm, cut through the noise in her mind, but she wasn't sure if she could. This was only the beginning. Mira nodded, the planner still in her hand, though her thoughts were already slipping away from the page. She let out a breath, shaky, quiet, but necessary. Everything today had been a test, and it still wasn't over. As the evening settled in, she was ready to leave, ready to collapse somewhere far from glowing screens and clipped voices. But before she could reach the door, Julian's voice stopped her. "Dinner," he said. "Come with me." She turned, confused. "Dinner?" He was already standing, already grabbing his coat. "You want to understand how this world works? Then watch it closely." There was no time for questions, no chance to decide whether this was work or something else. By the time she stepped into the car, Mira knew this wasn't just dinner. It was an invitation into something deeper and far more dangerous. The restaurant was the kind of place Mira had only ever glimpsed from the outside dim chandeliers, hushed laughter, waiters in tailored black moving like dancers. Wealth lingered in the air like perfume. Julian walked through the room as if it were his. She, meanwhile, felt invisible. No one looked at her. Not really. The waiter poured wine for Julian, not her. The businessman who came to shake his hand barely acknowledged her existence. She sat silently, watching as conversations were laced with coded threats, laughter masking calculation. Mira listened, not as a guest, but as a witness to a world where kindness was currency and power was the unspoken language. Then, without warning, the energy shifted. A woman approached, tall, blonde, effortlessly composed. She placed a hand on Julian's shoulder. "Julian," she said, her voice like silk with a blade hidden inside. "You didn't tell me you were hiring." Mira looked up, immediately on edge. Julian's face didn't move. "Mira." "This is Valerie Sinclair." Mira's stomach tightened. She had heard the name. Everyone had. CEO of Sinclair Industries. Whispers of her past with Julian hung in the air like perfume, too sweet to trust. Valerie's eyes found Mira's, with ease sharp, assessing. "Careful." "Sweetheart," she said, smiling. "Working for him is like playing with fire." Mira held her gaze. Her voice came out quieter than she'd expected. "Good thing I've burned before." Something shifted behind Valerie's eyes. Julian, for his part, said nothing. But there was something in his expression, a flicker of amusement, or perhaps warning. Mira didn't fully understand what she'd just walked into. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just business. This was a game of power, and she had just been moved onto the board. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Back in her apartment, Mira stared at the ceiling as Valerie's voice echoed in her mind. "Be careful, sweetheart." Was it a warning? A threat? She wasn't sure. But one thing she knew, she had stepped into something bigger than herself. The next morning, she arrived early, eyes tired, heart unsettled. But Julian's greeting was anything but gentle. "Where's the summary from last night's meeting?" She blinked. I thought it was just dinner." His jaw tightened. "In my world, Mira, every dinner is business." Her stomach dropped. I didn't know." Julian exhaled, frustrated, not cruel. "Pull a full report on Sinclair Industries. Now." She nodded, already moving, already typing, hands shaking but steady enough. As the files loaded on her screen, her thoughts swirled. Valerie hadn't shown up for nothing. She wasn't there to meet Julian. She was there to send a message, a reminder. She wasn't gone, and Julian knew it. Julian didn't lift his gaze from the file in front of him when he spoke. "I need you to do something." Mira sat up straighter. "Yes? You'll attend a gala tonight, in my place." She blinked. "Me?" He nodded once, still calm. "Observe. Listen. Report back." Her stomach twisted. I don't know anything about those kinds of events." He leaned back, folding his arms. "That's why it's a test." His eyes, sharp and unwavering, found hers. "Do you trust me?" She didn't answer right away. Did she? She barely knew him, his world, his rules. And yet, something told her that trust wasn't what he was really asking. What he meant was, do you trust yourself enough to step into this world and not disappear? "I'll do it," she said, quietly. He nodded. "Good." The ballroom was breathtaking. Golden chandeliers sparkled above a sea of glittering gowns and polished tuxedos. Marble floors gleamed beneath shoes worth more than Mira's rent. Conversations floated in refined murmurs, voices dressed in etiquette, but edged with calculation. Mira wore a sleek black dress, last minute, borrowed, chosen by Miranda with barely a glance. It fit perfectly, and still she felt like it didn't belong to her, like she didn't belong to any of this. She moved through the crowd with practiced stillness, watching, listening, just like Julian told her, just like someone who wasn't supposed to be seen. Then she saw her, Valerie Sinclair, standing in the corner, statuesque, poised, in conversation with a man Mira recognized from a file Julian once tossed across the desk, Jonathan Pierce, CEO of a rival firm. Mira slowed, inching closer. Their tone was quiet, but the words carried weight. "He doesn't suspect anything yet," Valerie said. Jonathan smiled faintly. "Good. Let's keep it that way." Mira's breath caught in her throat. Who were they talking about? Only one name fit: Julian. She stepped back instinctively, then froze. Valerie had turned. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Then Valerie smiled. Not warm, not polite, a knowing smile. Mira turned and walked quickly, heart pounding. She needed air. She needed to get out. But before she could slip away, a voice trailed behind her like smoke. "Leaving so soon?" Mira stopped, slowly turned. Valerie stood there, the picture of effortless grace, glass of champagne in hand. "You're bold," Valerie said, her tone laced with something Mira couldn't quite place. "I don't know what you mean," Valerie laughed softly. "Oh, you do. I see why Julian picked you, but be careful." There it was again. That word. That warning. Mira's chest tightened. "Careful of what?" Valerie leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Don't trust Julian Dalen." Mira's breath hitched. Before she could speak, Valerie had already turned, disappearing into the crowd like smoke into darkness. Mira stood frozen, surrounded by glitter and music and crystal chandeliers. But inside her, everything was trembling. She told herself not to believe it, not to believe the woman who clearly had her own agenda. But when she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling of her tiny apartment, the words echoed over and over again. "Don't trust Julian Dalen." Mira had tried to push Valerie's words out of her mind. It would have been easy if it had just been jealousy, an ex playing games, a woman's protecting her pride. But Valerie's eyes hadn't held jealousy. They held warning, and Mira couldn't ignore what she'd overheard at the gala. "He doesn't suspect anything yet." That wasn't flirtation. That was conspiracy. Something was unraveling, something Mira hadn't meant to get pulled into. But now she was caught between two powerful people, and no matter where she turned, she'd be stepping into fire. The next morning, she arrived at Dalen Industries earlier than usual, with a purpose locked behind her ribs. She would tell Julian what she had heard. It was the right thing to do, wasn't it? But as she entered his office, the words faltered on her tongue. He stood by the window, phone to his ear, voice sharp. "Yes, I understand." "No, it's handled." A pause. "I'll take care of it." He turned, his expression unreadable, but his presence filled the room like storm clouds. This wasn't just a man with wealth. This was a man who moved entire empires and made no apologies for how he did it. Mira's resolve wavered, then solidified again. I need to tell you something." Julian's gaze narrowed slightly. "Go on." She hesitated, then pushed the fear aside. "At the gala, I overheard Valerie speaking with Jonathan Pierce." She swallowed. She said, "He doesn't suspect anything yet." Julian didn't flinch, didn't speak, just watched her in silence. Then quietly, he walked to his desk, opened a drawer, and laid a folder in front of her. "Open it." Mira looked down, unsure, then slowly turned the cover. Photos, dozens, grainy surveillance images. Valerie, Jonathan. Together in corners, in hallways and shadows. This has been going on for weeks. Julian said, his voice flat. Mira's breath caught. You knew. A humorless smile tugged at his mouth. Of course. Then why haven't you done anything? He leaned forward, voice dropping low. Because you don't win by striking first. You win by knowing exactly when to strike. Something in her shivered. Was this why Valerie had warned her? Because Julian was playing a game too deep for even her to understand? He closed the folder. I need you to do something. Mira tensed. What? Get close to her. Her stomach turned. What? She doesn't see you as a threat yet. She'll try to charm you, manipulate you. Let her. Her breath quickened. You want me to spy on her? Julian looked at her. Yes. She shook her head. Julian, This isn't a request, Mira. Silence fell between them. She had come here to learn, to grow. But now she was being handed something else entirely. This wasn't about scheduling meetings anymore. This was about survival. That night, Mira received a message. Valerie Sinclair. Dinner tonight, just us. We should talk. Her fingers hovered above her phone, heart pounding. This wasn't a coincidence. Valerie wanted something from her, and Julian wanted her to say yes. She stared at the screen, then slowly she typed, Mira Elson, see you at 8, send. Just like that, she stepped deeper into the shadows. Later, she sat in a quiet restaurant, lit by flickering candles and polished silver. Across the table, Valerie Sinclair stirred her wine glass slowly, the rim catching the light. You came, Valerie said, her voice soft, her smile small and far from innocent. Mira straightened in her seat, willing her hands to stay still. The wine glass in front of her reflected soft candlelight, but her gaze was fixed on the woman across the table. You said you wanted to talk, Mira said, voice steady despite the tightness in her chest. Valerie Sinclair gave a faint smile, took a slow sip of wine. I'm curious about you. Her eyes glinted with something unreadable. You've barely been around, and yet Julian Dalen already trusts you enough to put you in rooms that most people never see. Mira kept her expression neutral. I just do my job, Valerie chuckled, low and knowing. Sweetheart, you don't have to perform with me. I've known Julian longer than most people stay in business. She leaned in slightly, elbows on the table, voice dropping in tone. Let me ask you something. Has he told you everything? Mira's heart stuttered. What do you mean? I mean, Valerie said, tilting her head. Has he told you who I really am? Has he painted me as the villain? Said I'm scheming with Jonathan Pierce behind his back? Mira didn't answer, but her silence was telling. Valerie's smile widened. Of course he has. And you believed him. Mira clenched her fists under the table. Why wouldn't I? Valerie's smile faded. She swirled her glass, voice turning cold. Because Julian Dalen is the most dangerous kind of liar, the kind that makes you feel chosen. Mira's breath caught. He doesn't trust. He controls. He twists half-truths into protection and wraps his manipulation in charm. Valerie's eyes flicked up, locking with Mira's. He made you believe you were different, didn't he? Mira didn't reply. Then tell me your side, she said quietly. Tell me the part he didn't. Valerie leaned back as though she'd been waiting for that invitation all along. I was with Julian for years, she began. I thought I mattered, thought he let me in. But Julian doesn't let people in, he collects them. He surrounds himself with loyalty, only to toss it away once it's no longer useful. Mira's chest tightened. Why are you telling me this? Valerie's gaze sharpened. Because you're next. The words fell heavy between them. Be honest. He sent you here to watch me. Didn't he? Mira's skin prickled. How did she know? Valerie smirked. He's predictable. Mira swallowed hard. If you think he's so dangerous, why are you still part of his world? Valerie's eyes darkened like a cloud crossing the moon. Because I refuse to let him win. Mira looked away, trying to breathe through the confusion rising in her. The room felt smaller, the light dimmer. Valerie leaned forward again, voice quieter now, but more piercing than ever. Tell me, Mira, what do you really know about Julian's empire? She hesitated. He runs Dalen Industries. Valerie laughed, but there was no humor in it. No, dear, that's just the face of it. What makes him powerful isn't what he owns, it's what he knows. The secrets, the debts, the invisible chains he keeps wrapped around people. Mira's throat went dry. Open your eyes, Valerie said, studying her. You're smart. You've started to see it, haven't you? Mira said nothing. But deep inside, something was shifting. Later that night, Mira walked the city alone, her mind racing, the streetlights blurred as thoughts collided in her head. And when she turned the corner toward her building, she froze. Julian was already there, waiting. How did you... He smiled. I have people everywhere. Mira's stomach turned. She couldn't tell whether it was fear or the sudden clarity of knowing that everything she thought she understood was about to fall apart. What did she say to you? Julian's voice was soft, but it cut through the air like steel. Mira hesitated. Her breath caught in her throat. She said, You lie, that you use people. A small laugh escaped Julian's lips, though it didn't reach his eyes. And you believed her? Mira looked down. I don't know what to believe anymore. He stepped closer. Mira. His voice lowered, more intense now. Valerie is dangerous. If you trust her, you'll regret it. His conviction was unsettling. So sure, so believable. But wasn't that exactly what Valerie had warned her about? Julian studied her in silence for a moment, then spoke again. I need you to do one last thing for me. She stiffened. What is it? Tomorrow night, Valerie is meeting with Jonathan Pierce. I want you to go, record everything. The words hit like a cold wind. Mira's stomach twisted. He was asking her to betray Valerie. But hadn't Valerie asked her to do the same with Julian? Mira was no longer just someone caught in the middle. She was now being asked to choose a side without knowing which side held the truth. After a long pause, she nodded, slowly. Okay. Julian's gaze softened, or maybe that was just how it seemed in the moment. Good girl. As he walked away, Mira stood frozen in place. Her hands trembled at her sides. She had agreed, but not for him, not for Valerie, for herself, because it was time to stop guessing, time to know. The next night, Mira sat in her car outside a luxury hotel. The city glimmered in the distance, indifferent to the storm building inside her. In her purse was a recording device, a small thing, but tonight it held the weight of something far heavier, the truth. Julian's last words echoed in her head. Record everything, but Valerie's voice was there too. He controls people by making them feel special. Mira had spent weeks trying to separate right from wrong. Tonight, there would be no more gray. She slipped the recorder into her purse and took a long, steady breath. No turning back. The lounge was dim, music low, voices quieter still. She spotted them. Valerie, Jonathan. Seated in a shadowed corner, speaking in low tones that carried tension beneath every syllable. Mira slid into a seat at the bar, angling her body, letting the microphone pick up what it could. We need to act fast, Jonathan whispered. Julian's getting suspicious. Valerie didn't flinch. She sipped her wine like it was nothing. Let him watch, she said. The more his eyes are on me, the less he sees what matters. Mira's pulse surged. Then Jonathan asked the question Mira didn't want to hear. You're sure she's on our side? Valerie smiled. She will be. Mira's breath stopped. They were talking about her. Jonathan exhaled. If she flips, it changes everything. Valerie's expression turned colder. If she stays loyal to Julian, she said softly, then she's a problem. Mira froze. It wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a verdict. She left before they noticed her. Her footsteps were quick, her breath shallow. By the time she reached her car, her hands were shaking. She had the recording. She had everything. But what she didn't have was certainty. Julian had warned her. So had Valerie. Each had called the other a liar, a manipulator, a danger. And Mira? She was the pawn they both believed they could shape. She stared at her phone. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Then she pressed it. The line rang once, twice, and then, Mira. Julian's voice calm, familiar, commanding. She closed her eyes for a brief second. Her decision was waiting on the other side of this call. The weight of the decision sat heavy on Mira's chest. Not loud, not violent, but crushing in its quiet certainty. She could have walked away. She could have pretended she knew nothing and let them tear each other apart. But that wasn't who she was. Not anymore. She took a trembling breath and chose, 1 hour later, she stood once again in Julian's penthouse. The city spread out behind him, a blur of light and glass. He didn't turn when she entered, just stared at the skyline, hands deep in his pockets. When he finally faced her, his eyes revealed nothing. Did you get it? Mira clutched her purse a little tighter. Then slowly, she stepped forward, pulled out the small recording device, and placed it on the desk between them. Julian picked it up, pressed play. The room filled with whispers from another world. Let him watch me. The more he watches, the less he sees. If she flips, it changes everything. If she stays loyal, she's a problem. Then silence. Julian didn't blink. He didn't speak. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, a smile tugged at the corner of his lips. You made the right choice. Mira stared at him. Did I? His eyes darkened slightly. You just saved yourself. She nodded faintly. But somewhere deep down, she wasn't sure if she had saved herself or surrendered something she could never get back. The next morning, headlines screamed across every screen. Breaking. Jonathan Pierce arrested for corporate espionage. Exclusive. Valerie Sinclair, under federal investigation. Betrayal inside the boardroom. Mira sat quietly in Julian's office, the news glowing faintly in the background. The world had moved, deals had collapsed, empires shaken. Julian had won, and so had she, in the way survivors always do. She hadn't come here to conquer. She had simply tried to hold on, and somehow she was still standing. Julian looked up from his desk, his gaze steady. You proved yourself. Mira didn't answer right away, because she knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning, not of a job, not of a title, but of a version of herself that finally knew how to choose and how to let go. In a world where everyone wants something power, control, loyalty, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to choose what you believe in. Mira didn't pick the winning side. She picked her own, and in that quiet defiance, she found something rarer than victory. She found her voice.